Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to our webinar today. This webinar is organized by the SPE student chapter of Technical University of Crete. And our speaker for today is Dr. Charles Elinas, Director and CEO of Cyprus Natural Hydrocarbons Company. Thank you very much for your presence today. It's an honor for our chapter. And the title of our webinar is Energy Security and Geopolitics, Impact on the East Med. Now, Agapi Fonodaki will read a short CV of our speaker. Agapi, the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Priscilla. So we're going to start with the CV. Dr. Charles Elinas has over 35 years of experience in the oil and gas industry in senior management positions. Today, he's the Managing Director, CEO of EC Cyprus Natural Hydrocarbons Company Limited, providing the management and consulting services in the oil and gas and energy sectors based in Nicosia, Cyprus, and London. At the same time, he is a non-resident senior fellow at the Global Energy Center, Atlantic Council, and the senior fellow at the Institute of Energy of Southeast Europe. Earlier in his career, he was the CEO of Crete, where he was responsible for the implementing Cyprus government strategy for the development of its hydrocarbon sectors, participation in the operation, and more. Until 2012, he was director of Mott MacDonald's for 25 years and CEO of Mott MacDonald's oil, gas, and petrochemicals business worldwide. Though he was responsible for the overall management of the group's oil, gas, and petrochemicals projects, planning and management activities worldwide. This project has won recognition through major awards such as the British International Expertise Awards 2006 for major projects such as the Kaufman Channel Gas Gathering Project for Shell in Nigeria, the Engineering Achievement Award at the Oil and Gas Middle East Award 2011, and many more. Mr. Elinas joined Mott MacDonald in 1987 as co-founder and managing director of the subsidiary Advanced Mechanics and Engineering Limited, AME, which specialized in analysis and engineering design and services of North Sea offshore structures and pipelines. He started his career in industry with J.P. Kenny, specializing in subsea engineering and pipelines, where he was manager of technical development until he left in 1987 to set up AME. Now we're continuing with the abstract. So Dimitra, you can continue.
Thank you, Agapi. The energy crisis is forcing governments to reconsider their priorities, with energy security and affordability coming to the top and climate change dropping down the list. The energy squeeze on Europe caused by the energy crisis and the impact of sanctions on Russia as a result of its invasion of Ukraine has been relentless. Despite the mild winter so far, the crisis is expected to worsen later this year before it gets better. It is likely that the world will experience more energy crises along the way, especially if the shift away from oil and gas is accelerated too soon before renewables and low-carbon technology reach the required levels to provide the energy the world will need reliably. With no end in sight of the Russia-Ukraine war, global energy markets will continue to be unstable, making 2023 another difficult year for global energy. The EU will have to secure gas at substantially lower prices than now if the burden to EU households is to be reduced to affordable levels and industry's competitiveness is to be restored, avoiding the industrialization that is already happening. It will also have to be dependable and reliable and not vulnerable to fast-evolving global geopolitics. Maximizing production of European gas sources, such as East Med gas, ticks all these boxes. So, how could the East Med contribute to EU's energy security? And now, Mr. Elinas, the stage is all yours.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Χαίρομαι που είμαι μαζί σας. Έχω ετοιμάσει μια παρουσίαση, αλλά είναι όλα στα αγγλικά και ελπίζω και η συζήτηση να είναι στα αγγλικά. Δώστε μου ένα λεπτό να ενωθώ με την παρουσίαση μου. Okay.
Yes, it's okay. We can see your screen.
Okay. Okay. So, as the introduction said, the world is in a state of energy transition from fossil fuels to low carbon and green energy. But oil and gas will be with us for a while yet, and I will explain the reasons in my presentation. It is important to remember that the trading and the prices of these commodities are governed by global markets. Often in our part of the world, people forget that. They think we are in control. We are not in control. Global markets decide what happens to oil and gas. The development of oil and gas resources in the East Med depends on these global markets and on international oil and gas companies, as the necessary know-how and marketing capabilities in our region are limited. In addition, we are in a region of complicated and deep-rooted geopolitics, made even more complicated by recent global developments, often with energy at the center. And this is what I will be talking to you about today. So, let me start with energy in 2002. So 2002 was a seismic one in terms of global energy. Everything we knew has turned upside down, replaced by a new, very different order and global energy flows. The energy crisis began after the summer of 2021. As the world emerged from the pandemic, the global energy entered a rapid recovery, and with it, energy demand increased. But after years of underinvestment, a dogmatic belief that renewables would soon replace fossil fuels, the supply of oil and natural gas couldn't keep up with the increase in demand, and inevitably, prices skyrocketed. In August 2022, natural gas in Europe reached the astronomical price of 346 euros per megawatt hour. To put that in context, that price was more than 20 times higher than pre-pandemic prices and equates to about $620 per barrel of oil. In other words, more than 6 times the price of oil. Huge. Electricity prices peaked even higher, to about 550 megawatt hours. So even though they dropped since, as you can see from the graph, they're still much higher than pre-pandemic levels, causing problems and impacting the economy. Now, the price of natural gas has fallen significantly to less than $50 per megawatt hour as a result of high supplies in Europe storages, but it is still about 3 times higher than pre-pandemic levels, and it is hitting European industry hard. However, we have a severe, if we have a severe winter early next year, natural gas reserves will be at risk of being depleted. Replenishing them later in the year will be much more difficult, as the supply of Russian natural gas to Europe is now at least 85% less than it was before the invasion of Ukraine, and it's difficult to replace. That could push prices back up, and with Asian LNG buyers ready to pay the asking price, LNG will be diverted to Asia, making Europe's life difficult. The price of Brent oil has gone through similar swings, but not as dramatic as for natural gas, possibly as a result of the balancing role provided by OPEC. But similar to natural gas, it is expected to rise in 2023 to above $100 per barrel due to China's exit from the pandemic and its economic recovery, and the possible effects of the cap on the price of Russian oil imposed by the G7 countries and the embargo on Russian oil products imposed by the European Union, all expected to take effect in the first quarter of this year, first half of this year. All of these had and have unprecedented impact on the global economy, on electricity and gas prices, global energy shortages, food prices, inflation, and the high interest rates that we are experiencing today, with the possibility of even global recession in 2023 still on the cards. The geopolitical developments of 2022 have appended the dynamics of global energy market and energy flows, leading to long-term changes. Global energy flows are in a state of radical change. Russian fossil fuel supplies are now headed to China, India, and Asia in general, with Russian natural gas to Europe largely replaced by US LNG, expensive US LNG. As tight oil and gas supplies continue to be a problem worldwide, prices remain high. OPEC member countries are increasing their investment in new exploration and production of oil and gas, but Western oil companies remain cautious due to the US and EU policies that continue to promote the replacement of fossil fuels with renewables and green hydrogen as we approach 2030 and beyond. This affects DSME too, and I will talk about it later. The global energy crisis of 2022 has given new impetus to renewables, but it has also made energy security a top priority. Affordability is also becoming a major issue and is expected to drive developments in 2023. With global energy demand continuing to rise, expected to rise more than 20% by 2050, all fuels, renewables, as well as oil and gas will continue to be needed for a long period of time to ensure secure and reliable energy supply. The energy transition will take time. What is needed is the right balance, with the use of natural gas as a transitional fuel and with simultaneous investment in renewables. The more diversified the global energy system becomes, the more reliable, secure, and affordable it will be. So what will be the issues in 2023? Unsurprisingly, energy security is expected to remain a top priority in 2023 at the expense of energy transition and climate change, with coal use continuing to increase, impacting global carbon dioxide emission levels. China's exit from coronavirus is one of the most important factors for energy markets in 2023, with China's energy demand and imports expected to increase significantly as its economy recovers. While global oil and gas supplies remain tight, it could lead back to high prices, impacting global energy, oil and gas, natural gas markets. With Russian gas supplies more limited, European gas and electricity markets could become difficult again by the end of 2023. The EU will redouble its efforts to accelerate the development of renewables. However, high energy prices and the uncompetitiveness of European industry may force a review of Europe's energy policy later in the year, especially with regards to the exit from natural gas, if it is not to face the risk of deindustrialization. Some European heavy industry companies have already started moving to places that offer cheaper energy, such as the US and the Middle East. This may accelerate is actually accelerating in 2023. With recession likely to affect many economies and inflation and interest rates remaining high energy prices and the uncompetitiveness of European industry may force a review as a set of policies. As a result, the need for government interventions to reduce energy costs will continue well into 2023. Clearly, the energy crisis has produced social inequality between countries. This is likely to worsen in 2023, threatening unrest and political instability. So what are the global energy challenges? The United Nations International Panel for Climate Change, IPCC, issued a report mid-March that makes alarming reading. Global warming is becoming increasingly dangerous, with irreversible consequences should the world fail to change course. IPCC called for an immediate stop in fossil fuel consumption and a rapidly accelerated switch to clean energy. But how feasible is this? It's one thing to say that, but is it feasible? Over 80% of global primary energy comes from fossil fuels. And this has been the case over the past 30 years, 80% year after year. And it will be 80% this year. And forecasts show that despite all the investments in renewables, forecasts show that by 2030, the contribution of fossil fuels will still be about 78%. In other words, all of these investments we're putting in renewables, all this increase in renewables, between now, 2023, and 2030, it will reduce the use of fossil fuels only by 2%. It shows the scale of the problem. In fact, the expectation is that in absolute terms, the consumption of fossil fuels will rise over the next 10 years as more energy will be required to fuel the growing global economy. The main reason is that global energy demand carries on growing, but renewables and clean energy technology are not growing fast enough to cover this growth, let alone replace fossil fuels. According to Bloomberg and the International Energy Agency, investments in clean energy must increase by a factor of 3 to 4 from current levels and remain at that level every year if the work is to achieve net zero by 2050. In other words, you are far, far behind. So stopping oil and gas and going into renewables, it's not yet the answer. It's not possible. In the meanwhile, because of climate change and government pressure, oil and gas companies are keeping investments low, around 50% of the levels before the last oil price crash in 2015, and still lower than pre-pandemic levels. This is happening at a time when oil demand is rising. Oil demand went up by 2.3 million barrels a day in 2022, and it is expected to rise by another 2 million barrels a day this year to over 102 million barrels of oil a day. This upward oil, but also gas demand trend is expected to continue for the rest of this decade, even though it will be at a lower pace. With economic activity rebounding, China is providing additional competition in our already overstretched energy market. In addition, BP's a new energy outlook based on known present technologies forecasts that you see from here, the green line at the top, forecasts that global gas demand will carry on growing by 20% by 2050. The line at the bottom is what needs to be done to achieve net zero by 2050. And you can see that we're already way away from it. The line is going downwards, but actually the trends are upwards. The green line is a forecast. The blue line is a backcast. In other words, you define where you want to get to, and then you work backwards to see what you need to do to achieve it. We're not achieving it. What we're achieving is moving up this green line. It's likely that the world will experience more energy crisis along the way, especially if the shift away from oil and gas is accelerated too soon, before renewables and low carbon technology reach the required levels to provide the energy the world will need reliably. I mean, eventually we have to get away from this green line and go towards the blue line, but we are not there. So we just cannot turn off oil and gas and hope for the best, hope that renewables will be there when we need them. Neither the renewables are, nor the technology is there yet. With no end in sight of the Russian-Ukraine war, global energy markets will continue to be unstable, making 2023 another difficult year for global energy. Last year's energy challenges could be repeated next winter. We are not out of the woods yet. The lack of investment, both in renewables and fossil fuels, is bound to lead to another energy crunch, another crisis, and higher prices. So what is happening to the world? As I said earlier, the energy crisis is forcing governments to reconsider their priorities, with energy security and affordability coming to the top and climate change down the list. It will take a long time before energy security ceases to be top priority, and not before the problems of reliability and long-term intermittency of renewables are satisfactorily resolved. We have a problem with renewables. It's not just that we don't have solar power when the sun is not shining, but actually this happens and wind is not blowing. Actually, this happens often over long periods, and batteries are not enough to deal with it. So if that is happening, then the only way to deal with it is either burning gas or coal. Preferably gas, though, not coal. The energy squeeze on Europe caused by the energy crisis and the impact of sanctions on Russia as a result of this invasion of Ukraine has been relentless. Despite the mild winter so far, the crisis is expected to worsen, as I said before. With economic activity rebounding, China is providing competition. BP pointed out that the scale of the economic and social disruptions over the past year associated with the loss of just a fraction of the world's fossil fuels has also highlighted the need for the transition away from hydrocarbons to be orderly, such that the demand for hydrocarbons falls in line with available, renewable, clean energy supplies, avoiding future periods of energy shortages and higher prices. The reality is that the global energy transition will take time. It is likely that the world will experience more energy crises along the way, especially if the shift away from oil and gas is accelerated too soon, before renewables and low carbon technology reach the required levels to provide the energy the world needs reliably. With no end in sight for the Russia-Ukraine war, global energy markets will continue to be unstable. So Europe is facing many energy dilemmas. Accelerating Europe's transition to cleaner energy could provide the answers. But with intermittency still a problem, the road to cleaner energy will be long and arduous, with natural gas needed for a long time to come. Eventually, Europe must recognize this and accept that new long-term gas contracts, greater than 15 years, required to justify the necessary investment in oil and gas infrastructure, will be essential. Europe needs a more secure supply strategy than just buying on the spot market with little control on prices and quantities. But right now, the EU is going in the opposite direction. EU countries intend to push for a global phasing out of fossil fuels among their climate diplomacy priorities this year, including a COP28 in Dubai at the end of the year. 2022 was a wake-up call for Europe, with high energy prices leading to social unrest, despite paying over 800 billion euros on energy subsidies. That's how much was spent on subsidies last year. Only by embracing social justice and meaningful democratic engagement can the EU accelerate and sustain climate transition and overcome its new trilemma. And the trilemma is green transition, social justice, and democracy. In other words, the energy transition needs to be grounded in energy security that is adequate and reasonably priced supplies to ensure public support and avoid severe economic dislocations with the dangerous political consequences that can follow. After a difficult 2022, the European gas market appears to have entered into a new phase, a new energy normal. Gas prices are down from their peak, but Europe faces a long-term loss of competitiveness. Surely, this cannot be acceptable as the new energy normal. The EU will have to secure gas at substantially lower prices than now, if the burden to European Union households is to be reduced to affordable levels and industry's competitiveness is to be restored, avoiding the industrialization that is already happening. It will also have to be dependable and reliable and not vulnerable to fast evolving global geopolitics. Maximizing production of European gas sources, such as med gas, ticks all these boxes. But instead of that, we have a policy paradox. The oil and gas companies have been under immense pressure from the US and the EU to stop investing in new oil and gas fields and support transition to cleaner fuels. They have responded to this, as I said before, with current investments in exploration and production down to about 50% of the levels 5 or 6 years ago. In fact, oil majors' capital spending plans are still below pre-pandemic levels, and no plans to raise them significantly in the medium term. The outcome is reduced reserves, tight spare capacity, and an inability to respond to increased demand. This is now coming home to roost. At a time when global oil and gas demand has been increasing, as the global economy has been coming out of the pandemic, driven by energy security concerns, supply has been unable to respond at the same pace, threatening energy security, and with the inevitability that market forces have been driving prices up. This has been made difficult, of course, by the Russia-Ukraine war, more difficult. In the middle of a global energy crisis, a policy paradox is emerging, where Western governments, on the one hand, tell the oil companies stop producing, and on the other hand, they call on OPEC and the oil and gas companies to raise output, while also saying they want to transition away from fossil fuels and restrict investment in more supply. You cannot have both of them at the same time, raise the output as well as not invest. The two don't go together. And yet that's what the governments are doing. The Secretary General of OPEC said recently that such mixed messages are holding back energy investments, sowing seeds for future energy crises, not just one, but multiple. He pointed out that with the average annual decline rates for oil and gas being at about 4 to 5% because of consumption, you are talking about needing to add 5 million barrels per day every year to just maintain today's global production. In other words, you need to keep discovering much more oil, equivalent to 5 million barrels of oil a day, if just to maintain where we are, let alone supply what the world needs. Renewables intermittency is still a challenge. And until the problem of long-term electricity storage is resolved, we don't have any means at the moment of storing any commercially available means of storing electricity over the long term. It will remain a challenge. A recent report by the World Meteorological Organization showed that climate change is causing prolonged periods of slow winds, making wind energy unreliable, requiring backup by gas, as happened in 2021, when wind energy was down by more than 30%, and is likely to happen this winter. Similar problems apply to hydropower. Renewables are coming, but they are not reliable. They're not an overnight solution. Energy transition is a slow process and will take time. In the meanwhile, uninterrupted, secure, and reliable electricity supplies can be ensured only with backup from oil and gas, preferably gas. We should also remember that energy is not just electricity. We often ignore that. When we talk about energy, we think it's just electricity. I mean, if you turn around you, oil and gas is used in everything. Petrochemicals, transport, aviation, shipping, not just producing electricity. However, if anything, I just want to add that even in electricity generation, the penetration of renewables is quite high, but not in all the other sectors. It's very low in the other sectors. For example, in Europe, the penetration of renewables is well below 10%, about 7 or 8%. We have a long way to go. However, if anything, Europe is speeding up its exit from fossil fuels, as evidenced by its Repower EU strategy and recent statements from the European Commission. So far, the decline in natural gas consumption in the European Union was 13% in 2022, and is still the use of gas is still decreasing, on the way to a 30% reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050. But there are signs that there is some rethinking. Germany is close to breaking its gas funds pledge made at COP26 and may be funding more gas projects. In fact, Germany has been in the process of building a number of FSRU terminals to be able to import more LNG to cope with these energy needs. And also using more coal. The G7 countries appear to be ready to adopt a resolution this month stating that we recognize the need for necessary upstream investments in LNG and natural gas in line with our climate objectives and commitments. Will the EU follow suit before the next crisis? It remains to be seen. The global goal remains to switch to green energy and eliminate carbon emissions. But until we get there, the world will still need secure and affordable supplies of oil and gas, and for some time to come. This was confirmed at COP27 by the majority of participating states that did not support phasing down oil and gas. In fact, the COP27 deal now includes a provision to boost low emissions energy, without defining what this means. It is interpreted to include natural gas that has the lowest emissions of all fossil fuels. To a certain extent, this reflects the important contribution gas is playing in response to the energy crisis, particularly in Europe. With no clear pathways to an energy secure future, completely reliant on renewables in the near to medium term, many countries still see a role for gas well into the next decade. This includes African countries that are asking financial support to develop their natural gas resources as part of the energy transition. Unless Europe realizes this, it will sleepwalk into the next energy crisis later in this decade, as the need for gas to make up for non-performing renewables becomes apparent. Without new production, gas supply will be tight, with gas and energy prices going up again. In this Med, in our region, we are stuck with the fixation that Europe needs our gas, and we need to help Europe by producing it and exporting it as fast as we can, ignoring Europe's stated policies to speed up energy transition and reduce fossil fuel consumption as fast as possible. Whether this European strategy works or not is not the point. As long as Europe sticks to it, it does not support increasing gas exports from the East Med to Europe, other than those covered by the, for example, as far as the East Med is concerned, by the EU-Egypt-Israel MOU signed 2 years ago, last year. And the oil majors know it. As a result, they are not investing in increasing production yet. Another challenge is that neither Chevron nor ExxonMobil plan to raise medium-term spending targets significantly. Chevron aims to raise oil and gas production by 3% a year, and ExxonMobil by about 2% per year. But that is largely coming out of investments made years ago. Such plans limit funding for new projects. Christian Asprey, director of Frontier Exploration in ExxonMobil, said at the end of last year at a conference in Nicosia that oil companies require assurances about future security of demand. In other words, long-term gas purchase contracts to facilitate future development. With Europe's current strategy, this will not be forthcoming anytime soon. But eventually, and hopefully before the next energy crisis, I believe that Europe will recognize that it needs gas longer term. Greece is accelerating exploration and even hopes to be exporting gas to Europe later this decade. But will it happen? Given the challenges exploration faces southwest of Crete, and ExxonMobil's views, I suggest, στα ελληνικά, να κρατάμε μικρό καλάθι. There are better chances of discovery of small to medium gas fields near Ioannina and in the north and in the Ionian Sea by Energean that could cater for Greece's gas needs. Now let's talk a bit about this Med. The geopolitics of the region are fast shifting. The ramifications of the re-election of Netanyahu in Israel, heading a government that is now shifting far to the right, are still unclear. In Cyprus, the election of Nikos Christodoulidis as a new president will hopefully usher in a new era. The regional political puzzle could become clearer only after next month's elections in Greece and Turkey. That's just a map showing you the gas fields and the blocks, Cyprus exploration blocks, but also the major gas fields discovered in the region. More activity in this Med in 2023 will be in Egypt, where oil companies' interest remains strong. Success with the new bidding rounds, which Egypt announced this year, will push exploration further. However, no new major discoveries have been made since Zohr. And I assume you all know, you heard the name Zohr before, the largest gas field in Egypt, basically. And Zohr's gas production is faltering due to water infiltration problems. In the meanwhile, Egypt's gas demand is increasing, and not just for lucrative exports due to high LNG prices, but also to rising domestic demand. Fast-track developments of the newly discovered gas field Nargis, discovered by Eni and Chevron north of Sinai, somewhere in this region, about here. using Eni's existing facilities will help. In Israel, Chevron will expand exploitation of Tamar and Leviathan, its two biggest gas fields. Chevron CEO Mike Wirth confirmed this during his firm's January earnings call and during Chevron's Investors Day end of February. He referred to new investments in Israel to expand gas production at Tamar and export of Leviathan gas using a floating LNG production vessel. But Chevron appears to have concerns of putting all its eggs in Egypt's basket. Egypt's economy is in tatters, but also there could be a regime risk if one is looking for 20 plus years of operation. There is also the risk that Egypt would divert gas imports to its internal market if it does not make any new big discoveries. With BP and ADNOC buying in March 50% of Israel's new gas company, thus entering Tamar, Leviathan, and Aphrodite, it opens new possibilities, strengthening Chevron's development plans. This is the right point to mention that the perennial East-Med gas pipeline. Is it still alive? Somebody asked me. The answer is no, not likely. It never was. In any case, with Chevron now considering a floating LNG vessel at Leviathan, there is no sufficient gas to support this project. Also, Europe is reducing gas consumption now, as I said before, and in the longer term, and is not looking for new long-term gas supplies to justify this pipeline. With the Lebanon-Israeli border dispute resolved, Total has committed to drill in Block 9 by next year, opening up possibilities for Lebanon's beleaguered energy industry. But they still need to make a discovery. They haven't done that yet. With uncertainties in global energy policy continuing, as Europe and the US continue to push for a faster energy transition, and elections in Cyprus, Greece, and Turkey this year, oil companies operating in Cyprus CZ are unlikely to announce any major new initiatives in 2023, other than carry on with normal exploration activities. Chevron's appraisal drilling at Aphrodite is expected this summer, but it may produce more questions than answers. The reservoir is compartmentalized, and the well will be drilled in the middle and a larger section. So Chevron will wait for that result before they decide what to do with Aphrodite. Even though Cyprus ex-minister of energy made frequent references to gas exports from Aphrodite starting 2027, there are no clear plans by Chevron and its partners to support this. The announcement of a 2 to 3 trillion cubic feet gas discovery at Zeus 1 in Block 6 by Eni and Total in December is good news. Small, but it adds to the two other small discoveries in the same block, Kronos 1, 2.5 TCF, and Calypso, likely with 1 to 1.5 TCF. It strengthens the case for a potential linking of these gas fields to the subsea production facilities at Eni's underperforming Zohr gas field in Egypt, to be transported to the Damietta LNG plant for liquefaction and export. Evidently, the companies operating in Cyprus CZ are not rushing with any new commitments at this stage. This was also confirmed by the Cyprus Energy Ministry. The ex-minister said there are several issues that we discuss within the development plan of each block. We do not have anything concrete to announce, but there will be some activity in the coming year. One project that may progress in 2023 is Energean's proposal to bring about 3.5 billion cubic meters per year gas from its Israeli gas fields to Vasilikos in Cyprus by pipeline and liquefy using a floating LNG vessel for export to Europe and beyond. But this depends on Energean making more discoveries from its ongoing drilling program. It needs more gas. The prospects for exploitation of the discovered gas fields in Cyprus in 2023 are low. Apart from the need for oil company commitment, this requires a change of policy by the EU regarding the future use of natural gas in Europe. Even though it is looking for new supplies in the short term to 2030 to replace Russian gas, the longer-term future remains uncertain. As I said earlier, the EU's position is to reduce gas consumption and eliminate it altogether on the way to net zero. With global gas demand, particularly in Asia, expected to increase by 20% by 2050, opportunities for development of this met gas for export are still being considered by the majors. An onshore liquefaction facility in Cyprus is still a possibility, but it is a long-term consideration. And it really depends on more gas discoveries and, of course, on market conditions. In other words, on how strong gas markets will be between 2030 and 2050, given the world's intention to transit to clean energy. But Cyprus must also prepare the ground to make this possible. An obstacle to developing Cyprus gas fields is the geopolitical risk associated with the unresolved Cyprus problem and Turkey's continuous threats. With elections in Cyprus, Greece, and Turkey ushering in new governments by the summer of 2023, the second half of 2023 will be the right time to redouble efforts to overcome these obstacles. Turkey's priority will be to tackle its catastrophic economic problems, something that will require the goodwill, cooperation, and support of Europe and the US. Readiness by Cyprus to enter into meaningful discussions to resolve the Cyprus problem will be supported by Europe and the US. Turkey may also consider this as key to regaining the cooperation of Europe and the US and become more amenable to working with them towards a solution. A cooperative approach by all is the one most likely to produce the best possible results. Preparing the ground also includes concluding the discussions with Israel regarding the Aphrodite-Ishai gas unitization dispute on how to divide Aphrodite gas that straddles the Z boundary between the two countries. But the changes in government, both in Israel and in Cyprus, because of this may have to wait until the second half of 2023 at the earliest to be resolved. With prospects for developing Cyprus EZ being low into 2023, the new president must prioritize the development of renewables from the currently low levels, upgrading the grid, electricity storage, and the construction of the Euro-Asia interconnector passing through Crete, expected to begin by the summer, would be of great help. Let's hope that after the elections, we will have leaders who will prioritize energy and regional cooperation for the benefit of all countries in the region. I think I'll stop here because we're running out of time. I have more, I can say more, but we'll stop here and have a discussion. And if you want to say more, I can say more about Europe's shift to clean energy, about what should be done, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ellinas. It was very interesting. You are the right human to talk about us about this aspect, I think, because you have a lot of articles also that you write about the energy crisis, the East Med, all about the stuff. Anyone in the chat, all the audience, you can submit your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand and turn on your microphone to ask the question directly. Whatever you want. I will give some time to the audience, but I have a question. Mr. Janas wants to ask something. Please.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It was a very interesting presentation. Unfortunately, I have a problem with my camera and I cannot have the video on. I would like to ask Mr. Elinas, do you believe that the reluctance of the European Union to start the project with EastMed pipeline is due to the fact that the Eastern Mediterranean region is a region of with many unstable countries? For example, we have the Greco-Turkish conflict about the EEZ. We have Israel with Palestine, and in general, it's a very unstable area to have this pipeline. That's why Greece and Italy have made their own agreements about the exclusive economic zone and start production of oil from those parts of the Ionian Sea.
I don't think that Europe is looking at it that way. After all, you have to remember that the European Commission funded the feasibility studies for the pipeline. Even though the United States declared its opposition to the pipeline because of geopolitical problems, particularly the differences between Greece and Turkey in not defining their EEZ boundaries, the pipeline has political support. The problem is what I said before. We have two problems. First of all, Europe's policy now is to get rid of gas. As I said, between now and 2030, Europe intends to reduce gas consumption 30% and continue reducing it until we reach net zero by 2050. So if Europe is reducing its gas consumption, how can it justify a new gas pipeline to bring even more gas to Europe? It doesn't. And the second big problem is, where is the gas going to come from? The gas originally was supposed to come from mostly from the Leviathan gas field in Israel and possibly from Aphrodite in Cyprus. The Leviathan gas now is being produced by Chevron for export through this floating LNG production facility for use in Israel and for some export to Egypt. So there is not enough gas to support the pipeline. And you have to ask yourself one more question. This project has been on the cards for over 10 years now. The international oil companies are the ones who would benefit greatly from it if the pipeline was to be built. So why is it that over the last 10 years, none of these companies has shown any interest in supporting the pipeline or committing to it or committing any gas to it or investment or anything? No interest at all, zero. Why? It's because they don't see the pipeline as viable for them and their plans. And that's why over the years, I have always been saying that this is not a viable project, because to make it happen, not only you need somebody to buy the gas at the other end, and you need the gas to put into it, but you also need the investors. Where are the investors? This is the problem.
Thank you very much. But about the investors, I've heard that they mostly went to the Gulf of Mexico to invest over those offshore facilities rather than in the Mediterranean.
Yes, because the American market is huge. but also the export facilities in the United States are huge. So the United States has, as you know, is becoming now the biggest LNG exporter in the world, and is exporting to everywhere else, not just Europe. That's why they're investing in producing more oil and gas in the Gulf of Mexico, but also in North America in general. And it's commercially more viable. It's cheaper. I mean, the East Med gas pipeline has also technical, technically it's feasible, but it is a challenging pipeline, expensive to construct, making the viability of it a bit more challenging than usual.
But it also could be a solution to the problem of the Nord Stream pipeline being destroyed a few months ago.
Yes, but the solution has already been found. Europe is importing LNG. It's not looking, as I said at the very beginning, East Med gas should be of interest to Europe, but Europe is not showing any interest in East Med gas. Europe signed this agreement with Israel and Egypt to export LNG to Europe using existing facilities and existing gas fields like Tamar and Leviathan. And the MOU is only valid to 2030. There is no provision to extend it beyond 2030, simply because the EU has been looking for gas to replace Russian gas this decade, but not beyond. They're not interested in new gas beyond 2030. That's why they are not supporting East Med gas beyond that. And I had that confirmed to me verbally by a very senior European Commission director. She said to me at a conference that the MOU with Israel and Egypt to supply gas from existing facilities is it. We don't need any more gas from the East Med. We're not interested.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. There is another question in the chat by Vasilis. So he's asking, regarding on the Euro-Asian pipeline, who are we considering as the providers and receivers of the hydrocarbons? Additionally, what do you think will the political power trade-off be that countries of low impact like Greece will have to comply with to be part of a said pipeline?
So Eurasia pipeline, which is, there is a Eurasia electricity interconnector, but there is no Eurasia pipeline other than the East Med gas pipeline, about which I just talked a few minutes ago. The Eurasia electricity interconnector is supported by the European Union. Not just supported, but more than 50% of the money needed to build it has been granted to the project by the European Commission. So the European Commission is very keen on this, as is keen to see interconnections with Israel and with Egypt, either directly through Greece or coming through Cyprus, but connecting these countries and Cyprus to Greece and from there to Europe. That has a lot of support in Europe because of the reasons I explained before. Europe sees electricity and clean energy as part of the future. Also, you can think of Egypt as a potential supplier of electricity to Europe more than any of the other countries, simply because of the vast land it has to support solar energy, and its solar density is very, very high. In Europe, building new solar farms is challenging because of lack of land. Europe has plenty of it. Egypt has plenty of it, and the building interconnectors can make it possible to produce solar energy in Egypt and take it to Europe through interconnectors. as is hydrogen. I mean, we didn't talk about green hydrogen, but Europe also has an ambitious target to produce 20 million tons of green hydrogen by 2030. Half of it expects that Europe expects to import. And Egypt is a country where there is a huge growing investment in the production of green hydrogen. And eventually, that will progress, and they will need to find a way to get it from Egypt to Europe. And one possibility is a pipeline coming through Greece, for example. But that has some way to go. These are the kind of projects that get support from the European Union because they have to do with green energy, with clean energy, not gas pipelines that Europe is trying to go away from.
All right. Mr. Yildiz has a question. He's our professor and our faculty advisor.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Of course, yes. Hello.
Okay. Hello, Dr. Elinas. Thank you very much for your nice and insightful talk. I am Andreas Yildiz, an assistant professor at the Technical University of Crete, and I also serve as the faculty advisor of the SPE student chapter at the Technical University of Crete. So in this role, I would like also to thank you for giving this lecture. It was very, very insightful and very helpful for our students. So my question is with regards to your, let's say, prediction that there will be more energy crisis like the one that we are facing in the near future. And my question is, what you believe will be the source of this crisis, given that the particular one that we are experiencing right now is due to the Russian-Ukrainian war. So it is a war conflict. This is the reason. Will there be any other type of crisis that would lead to, you know, to very difficult, you know, situations in the energy sector? What is your opinion on this?
Well, first of all, let me start by saying that the energy crisis you're meeting at the moment, it's not the cause of the Russia-Ukraine war. The Russia-Ukraine war contributed to it, but the actual crisis started before the war in 2021, as the world was coming out of coronavirus and energy demand increased very rapidly. There was not enough energy to supply it, and if you remember, by September 2021, prices of gas and electricity skyrocketed. They came down a little bit.
You're right. You're right. Yes.
They came a little bit down by December, but after the war they went up again. And obviously, the war made it more difficult. What the war has caused is complete change in the flows of energy. So Russian energy, plentiful Russian oil, gas, and coal is no longer coming to Europe. Only small amounts of gas are coming to Europe. It's diverted to Asia. And more oil and gas from the United States, but also from the Middle East is coming to Europe to replace the lost Russian fossil fuel. So this redirection of energy, this growing link between Russia and China is the way the future is going. When I referred to the crisis, it was something else I had in mind. As I showed earlier on, one in the graph from BP, I don't know if I can show it again. Now I can kind of show. This graph here. The energy and natural gas demand globally is increasing. And while it's increasing, we need to increase supplies, either renewables or both renewables and oil and gas. But as I showed, the investment in renewables and the investment in oil and gas is not growing fast enough to supply this energy. And if, for example, the investment in renewables is not growing fast enough, you can see from here, where is the graph? I had another graph showing the here it is. So these are the renewable additions every year. And you can see from here that renewables are building more and more renewables, but not at the pace required to supply the growth in energy the world needs. So if renewables are not sufficient to supply that, we need to supply it from other sources, such as gas, natural gas. But we are not investing to produce the natural gas required. So the supply of natural gas is tight. It's not sufficient to supply what the world needs. And Europe, beyond that, is telling us that its policy is to move away from gas. So I don't see how the two can be matched. Also, the technologies, the renewable technologies are not being developed fast enough. The IEA produced a report last year which showed that it's monitoring 50 new technologies needed to bring renewables into wider use. Out of the 50 technologies, only 2 have reached a maturity to the point where they can be used commercially worldwide. The remainder are still being developed. So for all of these reasons, unless we change policy and accept that we need natural gas while this transition is taking place, while the supply of energy is the demand for energy is increasing, we're going to reach a point where there is not going to be enough gas. Prices will then, and inevitably, if you have a shortage of supplies, prices go up. And I can tell you a little joke about this. I mean, it's called the can opener. So let me tell you the joke that I also produce in all my papers. So an engineer and an analyst are marooned on an island, and there is no food, and they find some cans of beans, but they're cans, they cannot open them. So the engineer, being an engineer, goes all over the island to find something to open them, but cannot find anything to open them. So he goes back to the analyst and says, he looks very sad and very disappointed. The analyst says to him, what's the problem? He said to him, I cannot find a can opener. The analyst says to him, don't worry, assume you have it. Assume you have one. You cannot do it by assumption. And it's the same thing Europe is doing. Europe, for me, Europe is assuming that when it requires the renewables and the renewables technologies to be there in 5, 6, 7 years' time, they will be there. But are they going to be there? I mean, for example, the IEA also produced a report showing that the Europe's plans for green hydrogen will not materialize by 2030. So if that 20 million tons of green hydrogen that is supposed to replace about 60 billion cubic meters of gas is not quite there, and the gas is not there, what happens? You assume you have it? That is not a solution. So this is why I said we are running the risk of more crisis. And that's why I also said that Europe will be forced to change mind. Already, the G7 are about to change their mind anyway by saying that we need to support investments in natural gas and LNG for the future.
Okay, thank you. I fully understand your statement and the joke about the can opener, which I find very intuitive. My aim for this question was whether the crisis will come maybe from environmental issues and not, a supply and demand character of the problem. So as you said in your earlier slides, the IPCC is urging us for,
Yes.
action in decreasing CO2 emissions. And all the scenario that we have available and everything that we are discussing is that we are still very much dependent on fossil fuels by 80%, as you said, and the demand is growing, and the renewables are stuck within a can without a can opener. So what I was wondering is if, as humanity, we will face an abrupt problem coming from the environment. The environment's response to our model of development and, handling energy. This was, the nature of my question. But I guess we cannot predict if there will be, a central decision to cut down abruptly in energy consumption.
But I share that, but I can tell you now it's not going to happen because, unfortunately, I mean, we all recognize it. First of all, at COP27 in Egypt last year, the shift went away from mitigation to adaptation. Mitigation means doing exactly what you said, finding a way to stop everything immediately and go to renewables or reduce energy or whatever. I think the majority of the countries participating in Egypt decided that that is very difficult, and we have to live with the consequences of where we are. So they have concentrated on adaptation. But there is more than that. Opinion polls show that even in Europe, almost everybody understands the problem and support measures for climate change. Not many are prepared to change their lifestyles to support their beliefs. They still want to go on holidays, flying. They still want to go to work by car and not by bicycle. They still want to eat their beef and animal products and not reduce these. So it's a big problem. And I can tell you one more thing. As I talk now, I'm sitting in The Hague in the Netherlands. The government of the Netherlands adopted European Union policies for emissions reductions, including other, not just CO2, but other materials, other elements. These affected farms in the Netherlands. The government decided that they have to reduce farming and close a substantial number of farms to comply with these European requirements. Guess what happened? The farmers developed, set up a new political party less than 3 years ago. And 3 weeks ago, in the provincial elections of the Netherlands, they became by far the biggest party of the country, protesting against reducing emissions. It's a protest party. And there is every likelihood that in 2 years, when the governmental elections take place, they may still be the largest party and will end up forming a government resisting climate change because it affects their livelihoods. And this is what is happening. Basically, if we push too far, too fast, people vote for those who promise to resist new laws against anything that affects our lives. This is the sad reality of everything. And that's why COP27 concentrated on adaptation and not just mitigation.
Okay, thank you very much.
There is another question by Vasilis in the chat. First of all, he thanks you, Mr. Elinas, and then the question is, these paradoxical policies, wouldn't they be easier to explain by talking about the politique royale? That is acquirement and control of power. I know it's a tricky and I know it is tricky to discuss such details when personal views should be kept distinct from company views.
How do I don't mind discussing anything. I don't have any qualms in discussing the issues. I think the key thing here is to remember what I said earlier on, that first of all, if you're talking about politicians and politics, is that part of the question? Sorry, I misunderstood. Have I understood the question? Can you repeat part of the question, because I didn't get it?
Yes, of course. He says these paradoxical policies, wouldn't they be easier to explain by talking about the politique royale?
Royale, what is that? Sorry.
It stands for acquirement and control of power. About the politics in geopolitics.
Yes. No, it's not easy, simply because of what I said before. If politicians take a certain view that the population doesn't like, they vote them out. They vote new ones in that give them what they want. This is what is happening here. And populist politicians rise in response to this paradox, to give people what they want, and as a result we end up with problems. It's best for serious politicians to understand the social factor, and part of the presentation that I was going to produce, I have here that I wanted to talk about, but we didn't have time, is this social factor. In other words, when we talk about energy, it's not just producing it or demand or consumption, it's the social factor. The energy is a fundamental human requirement, a fundamental right of every person. Every person is entitled to get the energy it needs reliably and affordably. The same as water. And not providing it, I'm afraid, causes a reaction. So it's not just geopolitics, it's the social factor. Geopolitics and politics responds to the social factor. It's the social factor that determines the composition of governments. And if we don't pay attention to it, and one of the reasons I commented extensively about the European Commission is that the European Commission is sitting in Brussels, unelected, appointed. They don't have to justify their actions to any voters like governments, like local politicians. As a result, they come up with all of these good things that we need to do, but the good things are not necessarily practical or achievable, and as a result, we need to compromise. And compromise comes only from elected politicians who have to respond to people. And sadly, as I said before, people understand climate change and worry about it. The problem is that to mitigate climate change, one also needs to be able to change, to be willing to change lifestyles. It's not just a case of demand, supply matching demand. Another way to do it would be to cut demand down, to cut energy down significantly. Europe has a target to cut energy use by 11.7% from today to 2030. It's a big cut, 11.7%. If they achieve it, it will help. But actually, you need to cut it even more. And yet, when we make projections about the world needs, they don't show a cut, they show increase. And let me give you a couple of statistics to explain why. We have 1.5 billion, over 1.5 billion Indians. An Indian uses about 20% of the energy of European and American users. We have a similar number of Chinese. They only use 40 to 50% of the energy Europeans and Americans use. And they aspire to improve their life standard of living their lifestyles and reach European and American levels. Imagine if their energy use grows from that 20% and 40% to 100% European and American citizens. Imagine the amount of energy required, and these people are not prepared to sacrifice it. And if nobody provides the energy they need, they vote in people who will promise them to deliver that. So, I mean, if we take China, for example, the growth of renewables in China is the fastest, by far the fastest worldwide. China is building more renewables than the rest of the world combined. It's not enough, simply because its energy needs are growing faster. So even though they're building renewables non-stop at a very fast pace, that is not enough to supply what China needs. As a result, what do? They have to rely on more oil and gas, and sadly on coal. China is still building coal power plants and importing more coal and producing more coal, simply because their people want to have a better life standard of living. They need more energy, and the government is obliged to provide it. Renewables eventually will catch up, but they're not there at the moment. These are the challenges we face.
Thank you. I think it was very insightful and very I don't know the word. Anyway, Janis Ioannis Panagiotis has another question. Please, Ioannis.
Regarding the lifestyle that you said and the increasing consumption of fossil fuel in the European Union instead of decrease. I'm doing my internship in Norway, and I'm doing about carbon capture and storage and carbon capture and utilization and storage of CO2. And the most common thing, the thing that we discuss a lot with my professors here is that since the EU and other countries see that decreasing consumption of fossil fuels, why are they so reluctant to invest in carbon capture and storage? Since we cannot decrease the amount of CO2 we get into the atmosphere, why are they not investing in this thing? I mean, it's feasible, it's working from what they saw. And one extra thing I saw in my research was that from 2002 until 2022, if you get into the NASA page and see the, what was the name? The data from the atmospheric infrared sounder, there has been like a huge increase in CO2 in parts per million in the atmosphere in this decade alone. And I mean, the governments see this thing. Why are they not investing in this?
Okay, I'll give you an answer. First of all, the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere sadly has been increasing by 2 parts per million every year for a long time now, irrespective of how much we invest in renewables. It hasn't deflected at all. Because another thing we haven't talked about, and we can have another discussion about it, is not just the emissions from human activity that matter, it's also sequestration, the absorption of CO2 from the atmosphere, mostly by rainforests. I don't know if you heard about it, but the Amazon, which was one of the biggest absorbers of CO2 in the world, 2 years ago, it actually became a net emitter because of burning the rainforest down, destroying the rainforest. And the same is happening in Europe now. In Europe, sadly, they see biomass as renewable energy. What is biomass? It's burning forests. And as a result, Europe, the European Commission is encouraging the use of biomass to replace oil and gas. But it is actually having a partial effect, because on the one hand, yes, it does reduce carbon emissions by not burning fossil fuels, but also it increases carbon emissions by reducing sequestration. So it's a fallacy. But let me go to carbon capture and storage. That is now recognized, and you will find that if you check very carefully the policies that are coming out now in Europe, but also in the United States, this technology is up and coming. I was at a conference in Vienna only 2 weeks ago, where the Equinor, the Norwegian oil company, presented a good presentation on a new project they have, a major new project to capture and store carbon in a depleted reservoir. That is increasing, and in Greece, Energean is proposing to do the same with the Prinos reservoirs. That is increasing. It's going to increase. It's bound to increase. And in the United States, the new what is called the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually is an act that provides for about $400 billion investment in clean energy. One of the central elements it supports is carbon capture and storage. So I see that as something that is up and coming, and it will increase as in Europe, the cost of carbon emissions, carbon emission allowances that companies need to buy and increases, and as the allowances are cut down, there will be little choice for the power companies but to find ways to reduce their carbon emissions. And one of the choices is that, and eventually I think it will take over. I mean, I don't know if you are following. The cost of emission allowances in Europe is skyrocketed. I mean, this year it reached 100 euros per ton of CO2, extremely high cost. In fact, it's so high that it's getting close to the 50% of the price of gas. So it's having an impact, and it would have an impact. And if we continue using gas, which we may have to, then with the cost of emissions up, of emission allowances up, and the allowances being cut down, carbon capture and storage will be a way to deal with it, except for one factor. Sadly, by increasing the emission allowance cost, the price of electricity goes up, and then people revolt because they can't afford to pay for electricity. So you have these opposing factors that you have to compromise between the two. But it will be part of the. I believe it will be part of the future. And if you are working on that in Norway spearheading the technology within Europe. So it's a good place to be.
Thank you. You're referring about the Northern Lights project.
Yes.
They started test pumping, test injecting CO2, I think this week or the previous one.
That's right, yes.
And about the Prinos field, you mean the South Kavala gas field?
No, not the Prinos field itself, in the area, yes, Kavala, I don't know.
But that one, I think, is it's another internship I did in Greece. It is about underground gas storage, but not CO2 storage.
But they're also looking at using some of the depleted gas fields for storage of CO2. But yes, the idea started for storage of CO2, and now that gas has gained particular significance because of Greece becoming a gateway of gas into Northern Balkans, they're looking at storage as well.
Thank you.
And one last question there is in the chat by Adonis Triados. He says, thanks, Charles. Could you give a comment regarding the United Kingdom's plans to reach net zero in the next decades? Sounds impossible to my ears, and I can see a lot of paperwork here in the UK to look green, but nothing really changes.
UK is not alone. The net zero is a good concept. It's difficult to achieve, very difficult to achieve. And the UK is introducing new policies to achieve net zero, but the new policies are not going far enough to actually deliver net zero. But nobody else, I mean, at least in the UK, in a way they admit they cannot achieve it. Many other European countries are not honest enough to admit that net zero is a target that may be difficult to achieve by 2050. It may be achieved later. In fact, I'm preparing an article right now based on a Shell study that looks at two scenarios. One scenario is how to achieve net zero, starting with the target of net zero by 2050. And working backwards at what needs to be done to get there. And another scenario which merely looks at what actually is happening now, what the policies are and what policies are coming, and what the trends are, and projects forecasts into the future. And as you can imagine, the two go in opposite directions. Reality is going to be somewhere in between. Over the next 10 to 15 years, forecasting is the only way to determine where things are going, because policies don't come in that quickly and take time for policies to be implemented to have an effect. But in the longer term, the world is going to be driving to reduce emissions, and eventually, I think that will be achieved, but possibly not by 2050, later. In fact, the Shell scenario shows that the net zero will probably be achieved closer to 2100 rather than 2050. It's the challenges we're facing. It's one thing to talk about things, and it's noble to have targets and everything else, but reality is different. And it's not just what Europe is doing. Europe, you have to remember that Europe only consumes about 9% of global energy. The biggest consumers are not Europe and the United States anymore. The biggest consumer is China by far. And as I explained before, China's way of looking at energy is different. China, being the kind of a country it is, wants to keep its people content and the system, the political system, intact. That means as the economy grows and the need for more energy increases, they are not going to look at net zero by 2050 and say to the people, sorry, we cannot give you the energy you need because net zero doesn't allow us. They provide them the energy they need. So they build renewables non-stop at a very fast rate. They have the biggest renewables industry in the world, by far the biggest. But they also need gas and oil, and they also need coal to provide this growing energy. And that statistic I gave you, that a Chinese is using only 40% of the energy a European uses, is the driving factor. The Chinese are becoming affluent. They want to go on holidays. How many Chinese do you see these days in Greece coming for holidays? The numbers are increasing. And China, the Chinese government is not going to stop them. So net zero is a noble target, but and we should all try to achieve it. But I'm afraid it's realism. Pragmatism means that it's a target difficult to achieve.
Yeah, I think it looks clear to all of us after this discussion. I think we're done with the Q&A session. We would like to thank you once again for giving us this very insightful speech. I think everyone is honored by this. We would like also to thank everyone that attended our event and for staying till the end and making this great discussion. I think it was very interesting. I think that's all.
Okay.
Sola, do you want to say anything?
No, I just want to thank you once again. It was a very insightful talk. I think a lot of us understood a lot of things more clearly. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you too for the opportunity you gave me. I'm really happy to have been able to talk to you and delighted to have the discussion with you. And I just want to leave you with one parting shot. Crete, southwest of Crete appears to be the center of interest for Greece now for gas. And it's not going to be easy, but remember what I said at the beginning. It's not us, it's not we Cypriots or Greeks that decide what is going to happen and have control over it. It's down to the global markets and prices and the international oil companies that have the know-how. And we need to be careful to understand that and work with that and not assume that because our politicians say what they say and what they want to do is doable. It's not always the case. So you as students need to be looking always at what is happening globally with energy. It's a global commodity. And unless you understand that, then you will be reaching the wrong conclusions on issues to do with energy, even within Greece. So always pay attention to global markets and prices and trends and what the oil companies do, but also the renewables companies. It's a global commodity, and remember that. But thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you once again.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.